Hello, Namaskar, good afternoon. Welcome to NCRT's live interactive session. This is Simran Singh. And viewers, you are all watching us on PMeVIDYA channel number 4. Or you can also connect with us through our YouTube channel that you all know, it's NCERT Official. Now we know that all our students watching our sessions, they love stories. So it's the story time. That is, we are going to discuss about a story. The title of the story says, The Garden Goes to the Beach. Well, this session is for class 4th students and obviously the subject is English. But students from any other classes, if you love to hear stories and if you are enjoying this session for another half an hour, do write to us in the comment section of NCRT Official. Besides, if you have any of the queries, so feel free to give us a call at 8800-440-559. Apart from that, as I already mentioned that the session is for class 4th students. Still, if you have any queries, any doubts, do write to us at this official mail ID that is flashing on your screens. dth.class4@ciet.nic.in. So now we know that it's the story time and The Garden Goes to the Beach is the story that we are going to hear today. But who is going to tell us story? Who is going to recite it to our viewers? So we have with us our expert for the day. Let me introduce her to you. In the conversation, we are joined by Miss Shannon Dyers. Namaskar, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Simran. So nice to see you.
A very warm welcome in the session. Ma'am is currently serving as high school teacher from Manovikas School. Madgaon has joined in from South Goa. So you know all the mediums through which you can connect with us. So let's begin our session. Well, I love to hear stories. So ma'am, what is this all about? And it's a very striking title. The Garden Goes to the Beach. Now, how could garden travel and what all happened in the story? Could you unfold it to our viewers?
Well, to begin with your imagination, you can do anything. Okay, so I'm very fond of stories, not just to read them, but also to write them. And this is something I thought of sharing with students of class 4. Now, the first question I always get is, how do I write a story? It's like anything that you want to try for the first time. You do your best. And there's a few tips and tricks to how to write a story, but the biggest key is to just use your imagination and write about the things that you know about. So one simple thing that you can do when you want to start writing stories is choose a place where the story can happen. It's called a setting, but really it's just a place for a story to take place. A story can take place in your backyard, a place that you visited on holiday, an imaginary place if that's something that you like to come up with or think about. So in this story, we've actually got two places that we're going to see. One is a garden and one is the beach itself. This is because there are a lot of beaches where I live also. And when I was very young, I used to like going on picnics just to play in the water. So that's also important. Write about what you know about. Share the things that you love with other people in your writing. It doesn't need to be a long, complicated story. It can just be something fun and enjoyable. So the other thing to think about also are just the people in your story. The story can be very simple, but the most important thing is to write about characters that people will like, that people can understand, that speak to the person reading the story. In this story, we also happen to have a talking tree. And if this sounds a little impossible, it probably is. But in an imagination, there's really no limit to what you can do. And maybe a talking tree is very symbolic of sometimes nature needing to speak to people in ways that we sometimes aren't very willing to listen. So to begin with the story today, we'll discuss the story. We'll now begin with the story itself. Once upon a time, there lived a happy gardener who spent his days tending to a vibrant garden. Every flower you could ever imagine sprung from the ground because of his talented hands and love for nature. They varied in hue from mellow yellows to radiant reds and lovely lilacs. And lilac is a kind of shade of purple. The gardener was proud of his plants and rarely ever took a holiday. So you can see here he was someone who really enjoyed his work. He loved spending time in the garden. He loved everything that he grew. And the story is mostly about the flowers that he grew in this garden. So then, his flowers of course loved him back, for he took the time each day to tend and talk to his little darling. Although they enjoyed their time in the sun each day, they would also ask time and again if they could all visit the beach together. So you might see gardeners also saying that it's nice to talk to the plants. In the case in this story, the plants are speaking back. And they have, since they've known the gardener for so long, they have things that they like to ask him. And one of the things that they always want to do is to go on a trip together, particularly to go to the beach. So tomorrow, he promised, one day with a laugh, we will all go tomorrow. And since he's such a good gardener, he intends on keeping that promise. Unfortunately, as the sun shone bright and beautiful the next day, the gardener found his body felt warm and heavy. He was suddenly ill. From his window, he could hear a commotion in the garden over the wall. No doubt the flowers all expected a trip to the beach and were getting ready at that very moment. Sometimes this happens. There's a small problem with something that you've planned. So what do you do when you have a slight problem with plans? You make adjustments, or your parents might make adjustments, or you may have to take a little bit of disappointment sometimes. This story has a much happier ending, of course. But sometimes things don't always go as planned, which is all right, and that's something that everyone has to live with. So here, even though the next day was bright and sunny and perfect for a picnic or a day at the beach, the gardener found that he was not very well. So at the same time, he probably felt a little unhappy that he couldn't take his favorite flowers to the beach for the day. So, not wanting to disappoint them, he stuck his head out of the window and prodded the large mango tree that overlooked his garden. So he didn't want to disappoint them, so he decided to ask a friend for a favor. Prodding someone means to poke them and try and get their attention. You might prod someone next to you in class, poke them and ask them, what did teacher say just now? Could you repeat? Could you tell me what it is that she said? Okay. Hey, he croaked, and he was croaking because his throat was probably not very well, and it made a sound almost like a frog. Could you do me a favor? So, what's the favor? You may ask a friend to help you out in a time of need. In this case, the gardener decided to ask the tree for a little bit of help. So he asked, could you do me a favor? He did not force the tree, he did not try to shout at the tree. He asked him very gently if he could do him a favor. Now, the mango tree had been asleep. The mango tree shook himself awake. Huh? What's happening? It's me, the gardener, he continued. I promised the flowers a day at the beach. Will you please take them for me? So this is not something the tree is very willing to do right at this moment. He had never been particularly fond of flowers. The tree had never been particularly fond of the flowers. They spent every mango season flicking small stones at him until tiny golden bombs exploded on the ground beneath. Nevertheless, the gardener had been a friend of his for many years. So he lifted his large roots from the earth and stepped over the garden wall. This is also something important to understand. Not everything. Somebody may ask you for help sometimes. It may be a little bit inconvenient. It may not fit your schedule. But if someone is a friend, you don't just share in the happy times. You also share in the times when they may need you to help them, especially in the time of need, particularly when they want to do something good. So even though so you can see the tree is not a perfect person. Nobody is a perfect person. But despite what he was feeling, and despite the fact that he had never really gotten along too well with all the flowers in the garden, he decided to still do his old friend the gardener a favor. And you can see here also the flowers were in the habit of troubling him from time to time. Like very small children, they probably enjoyed picking stones and throwing his fruits down from the tree. But he decided that he was still going to do his old friend a favor. So he lifted his roots out of the ground and he climbed over the garden wall. And when he gets there, he finds actually a great deal of chaos. Hey, he shouted over their vibrant, chattering heads. They've been making a lot of noise, waiting for the gardener to turn. The gardener is not feeling well. Boo, they shouted back at the startled tree. And obviously this was not good news for them. And in his attempt to try and make them feel better, he immediately said, I'm taking you to the beach instead. Yay, they chorused, appeased once more. Now to chorus something is when everybody says something together at the same time. When they say the same thing together at the same time. So Now that all of them are slightly appeased and feeling a little better that their day trip has not been cancelled, they are all going to go to the beach. Most of the orchids refuse to cooperate. And here in this slide, we're going to meet all the different types of flowers. Refuse to cooperate, meaning they were not very happy with this change of leadership, with this change of the person who was going to be looking after that trip. They felt they'd been overlooked as the most beautiful since they were so expensive but full of fragrance. The marigold was bored and had to be coaxed at every moment by the patient but exasperated tree. So the tree was growing more and more frustrated, getting all of these different flowers to go to the beach without any hassle. And you can see that they all had very different personalities. There were some that wanted a little bit more attention, some that were very reluctant to make this trip. Several of the lilies began shouting that they were tired and dry. It was a hot day, so they were a bit exhausted. They were feeling very warm. They demanded to know how long they'd have to go to reach their destination. It was the lotus who was the only obedient one, happily sliding along until they reached the beach. Most of them were shoved aside by a thorny bunch of roses who had no problem elbowing everyone to get a good spot by the seaside to play in the water. So finally everybody makes it to the beach with a great deal of hustle and bustle and no small amount of chaos and confusion. But everyone is there and everyone's happily playing in the water. And you can see that the tree is having a slightly tough time because this is not what he usually does. He's very used to standing by the garden, probably just shaking mangoes out of the tree or napping as we met him in the first part. Okay. And here we can actually see a picture of the different types of flowers. The lotus, the marigold, an orchid, and a sunflower.
But I really want to know, why is Marigold looking angry?
Well, he was, as you can see here, he was a little bit bored, and he had to be coaxed at every moment. He's the kind. Every flower is different, like all people are different. So some people always need a little bit more of a push to get somewhere. They may need a little bit more coaxing, and he probably just didn't. He probably just was not very happy about the length of the trip and how hot and tiring the day was. But when they reached the beach, I suppose everybody would be much happier.
Of course.
When the tree started checking it, and because the tree was a good tree, he also had to check to make sure that everyone was there. When the tree started checking if everyone was there, he discovered that someone had forgotten to inform the sunflowers that they were spending the day at the beach. So someone did not make it to the beach. When he innocently asked who had been the one tasked with informing them, chaos broke out. So the flowers had been told to tell each other and be present for the trip. Leaves and thorns, which are like their hands and arms and hands, were pointed accusingly in various directions. So everybody tried to blame each other for forgetting who had forgotten to inform the sunflowers. The noise had reached such a deafening level, meaning they were making so much noise it was almost like you couldn't hear, that he threatened to send everyone home at once. He was forced to raise his voice to be heard above the noise. They might spoil what he hoped would be a fabulous day. This whole situation left him so irritated that he vowed, which is another word for promised, to never do a favor like this for the gardener ever again. So, although everyone's at the beach, it doesn't look like everyone is having such a great time. The march back to the garden was quieter. Now that everyone's tired at the end of a long day, going back to the garden is a bit more tiring. The flowers were tired from such a long day at the beach. The gardener was waiting for them when they came back, a little smile on his face. "How was it?" he asked the chattering one. The tree held its breath, expecting complaints to pour from the flower's mouth. "It was amazing," the orchid squealed. "Yes," the marigold said, bouncing up and down its place. To the mango tree's complete surprise, the flowers also said they'd had a lovely time at the beach. "Well," laughed the gardener, "I hope you know who you should thank for a lovely trip like this." And in the end, the tree had done his best. He did a favor to a friend. He had a great deal of patience with the flowers. And the flowers, even though things did not exactly go according to plan, it was still a very valuable trip and a nice experience for them. They got to leave a place. They got to leave their regular place for a little time and have a day out somewhere else. And and it's not just for the flowers also, but the mango tree also learned something from this trip. And to the mango tree's surprise, every flower turned and rushed to hug him, thanking him sweetly for a wonderful day. Goodness, he thought. They can be very nice when they want to be. And the next mango season, instead of the stones they picked up and threw at him, he found many a smile directed at him from the garden. And now that we've reached the end of our story also, there's a few things to think about. Whenever you read a story, your first thing should always be, well, whether you enjoy it or not. And if you don't enjoy it also, that's also still okay. Maybe there's something better that you can think of also, right? It's never about being perfect, but it is about expressing an imagination. Your characters don't always need to be people. Sometimes they can be talking flowers, sometimes they can be talking animals. You know, a little bit like some of your favorite Disney and Pixar movies. So it's always something to enjoy. Now, we're going to talk a little bit at the end of this about using new words. You can see here that the flowers are not just described with using colors, but they are also described by using certain adjectives. Something is vibrant means something is bright and beautiful. Something is bright and lively in its appearance. The word ill to describe someone falling sick. So doing someone a favor. Okay. So what does the word favor mean? To do something for someone, not really in exchange for something at that moment, but to help out somebody in need. And the word forest. Sometimes you might say things in a story like everybody spoke all at once. Those may be too many words. So it might be easier sometimes just to use one word instead, like how the word chorus is used in the story. Alright. And finally, I always like to talk about the different phrases that we can make up ourselves also. Instead of saying the mangoes exploded on the ground, you say that they were like tiny golden bombs falling down from the tree. A different way for saying the mangoes fell to the ground and got smashed. You can see throughout the story also that there's a couple of places where things are highlighted. You can see here, and another important thing about learning vocabulary from a story also. Whenever you read a story, don't just think about the reading of the story and the enjoyment of it. The next step is to see whether you can understand certain word meanings, not necessarily by looking at a dictionary, but by taking a look at the sentence itself. For example, this sentence: a happy gardener who spent his days tending to a vibrant garden. From this we can tell there's many flowers, they are bright in color, there's many of them. There's even, a way to describe a certain personality, that is saying that someone has a very vibrant personality, like they're a very lively person. The next thing that you can see here, a couple of other highlighted words. And again, this is about learning meanings, not through just learning vocabulary, but also through just reading the sentence. That's the best way for you to learn something new, the best way for you to learn a word that you've never heard before. You can see from this part, and you can see it from the earlier sentence also, there's a bit of a hint. Unfortunately, as the sun shone bright and beautiful the next day, the gardener found his body felt warm and heavy. He was suddenly ill. We can tell from the way that the sentence is written that the word ill means to be sick, to fall sick, to not feel very good. And an important thing also from this particular sentence here, you can see from the highlighted word, hey, he croaked, could you do me a favor? The words could are used. Can and could don't necessarily mean the same thing. When you ask someone, could you do me a favor, what you're basically asking is if they can do something for you. You're not demanding something from them. You're asking them. You're making a request. You're hoping that they will help you out when you need to. And like the mango tree, that is very often when you should help out. And you can see here also a very vivid description of a scene. They spent every mango season flicking small stones at him until tiny golden bombs exploded on the ground beneath him. This is a description of them basically troubling him every mango season, flinging stones at him and hoping that he would drop some of his mangoes to the ground. And again, a use of words that is slightly new. Yea, they chorused, appeased at once. If you're confused about the meaning, if you can see from the way the flowers have spoken, you can see from the way the sentence is used, and the fact that it says they, it means many. So you can tell chorus is something that a lot of people do together. These are not words that you need to memorize. But I'm hoping by the end of this lesson that everyone will have learned a couple of new words at least, and that they'll be familiar the next time you read a story. Now the next part of the story. Most of the orchids refused to cooperate. They felt they'd been overlooked as the most beautiful. You can see a couple of words again are highlighted. Refusing to cooperate means you refuse to get along with someone. You refuse to listen when an instruction is given. And refuse means to just basically not do something, to not want to do something, and to show in your actions that you're not going to do it. They felt they'd been overlooked. Overlooked in the sense they basically like saying they felt they'd never been given enough attention. They felt they'd never gotten as much attention perhaps as the other flowers. Okay. When he innocently asked who had been the one tasked with informing them, chaos broke out. Now, what does chaos mean? Chaos is sometimes chaos we can see around us on a regular basis. Actually, you can call a traffic jam complete chaos because there's a lot of honking, a lot of confusion, a lot of people wondering in which direction they should go. So that's one example of chaos. It also helps to think about examples of the words and not just the meaning. So what is chaos exactly? It's basically a state of total confusion. Okay. And here we have a slightly more familiar word. This whole situation left him so irritated that he vowed to never do a favor like this for the gardener again. Saying the word promised is a nice word, but when you say the word vowed, it is a little bit more dramatic. And drama is what you want in a story. So he promised loudly and very avidly that he would never do a favor like this for the gardener ever again. And at the end of the story, what we think about is, as far as possible, a happy ending for everybody. What we have at the end of the story like this is a kind of nice resolution where everyone is happy, and that is what you should aim for at the end of a story.
Yeah.
Is everybody happy? Is everyone satisfied? Most importantly, are you as a writer satisfied with your story? Don't think about so much about what other people think, but are you happy with your story? That's the most important thing.
And I think the best part of the story was when the flowers rushed to hug the mango tree.
Yes.
Because of the fabulous day that the mango tree has brought in for them.
Yes. At the end of the day, everybody was very happy with each other. Everything did not go according to plan, but it will still be a very happy occasion.
Okay, ma'am, we came across a number of new words and you have discussed about some of them. We are left by the last 1 minute in the conversation. I have the small question. I came across two words, mellow yellows and radiant red. Now we know yellows and red. So mellow and radiant. Are they shades of these colors? Why do we use such terms?
Oh, yes, of course. Mellow yellows and radiant reds. We all know what a color is. Yellow, red. Okay, but when you yellow is always a slightly softer color. Okay, reds are, as you say, a little bit more vibrant. Okay, so mellow meaning would be like, in this case, not just a shade, not a shade exactly, but more like
highlighting the quality of that color.
Yes, highlighting a quality. A descriptive word, a soft yellow color and a bright red color. You don't have to use and using slightly different words than the usual way of speaking always makes a difference. And you can see that these do rhyme a bit also, mellow yellows and radiant reds and lovely lilacs. So that does create something nice in a story.
That was a lovely story and a wonderful indeed to listen for all our viewers. And I think class 4th students, you can also make up such stories with the help of a lot of creativity. Once again, thank you so much, Shannon ma'am, for being a part of this conversation and apprising our viewers about this beautiful story that said about the garden goes to the beach. And tomorrow at the same timing, we'll have a session of mathematics for class 6 students where we'll be providing information regarding the basic geometrical ideas part 3. Our upcoming session is our webinar session where we'll be discussing about the journey of National ICT Awardee. So stay tuned to NCRT. But it's time to wrap up this particular session of English. Namaskar.
Thank you so much.